Okay, lovely. Thank you very much for the introduction, Mike, and thank you again, everybody, for joining us. For many of you, this is the third Tuesday evening in a row that you've joined us, and we appreciate you taking the time. We very much hope you're finding these sessions useful, and we very much hope that you'll find this evening's session useful as well. So, as Mike has said, my name is Grant Landon. I'm the Regulatory Practice Development Manager, and I'm going to kick off, and I'm going to talk about the analysis of findings from the early years inspections from 2018 and 2019. The vast majority of what I'm going to talk to you about is based on a piece of research done by Sinead Hannafin, whose name you can see down there in the corner. From Research Matters, with a little bit of additional information. It's important to say, as Mike has already said, that the full report that Sinead completed in relation to this is available on our website. It's been available on the website since we launched the report at the beginning of February, and there's also a summary version. The summary version is, I think, about 15 or 17 pages. Strongly recommend that if you have an opportunity to read that, and there's a lot more information in both the summary report and the detailed report that I'll be able to go into today that gives you some information behind the data. And similarly, when I hand over to my colleague Denise, who's going to be talking about the enforcement, the outcomes from enforcement activity, it's based on the same research, but also completed by Sinead, and there's a separate report there, again available on the website, both in full and so. We've both, Denise and myself, have got some additional information on top of that which Sinead had undertaken, trying to bring us a little bit more up to date towards 2020. So I shall go through these. I'll go through the slides and talk about what we have here, and then there'll be an opportunity to pause for some questions at the end if there are any. And as Mike has said, please, by all means, at any point, use the chat function to raise any questions, and we will come to them as best as we can at the end of each presentation. So there's a picture of the report, analysis and trends from 2018-19. The main report is about 80 pages. As I say, the summary report is about 17. There's separate analysis in there for 2018 and 2019. There's information about compliance across the there are details about issues arising from those regulations which are non-compliant, which are more frequently non-compliant. There's information behind that, those statistics, and then there's some trends in compliance that go back, as I mentioned earlier on, they go back to 2017 all the way to 2019. So we can begin to get a sense of those regulations, those types of services, and those geographically located services where compliance is higher or slightly lower. And there's, as I say, the summary report is available. So let's move into the first one. So this gives us some information about the approach that was adopted by Sinead when she undertook this research. So the aim was to carry out a trend analysis on the findings of early years inspections over a 3-year period from January 2017 to December 2019, and a quantitative and qualitative analysis approach was taken, and there was linkages with the early years inspectorate register to make sure everything was correct and as accurate as possible. So, and there's just the number of reports that were looked at. So in 2017 it was 1563, in 2018 it was 1557, and then 1389 in 2019, and then the number of regulations that were looked at in each of those years, ranging from 14,271 in 2017 to 8,625 in 2019. So that's the approach that was adopted and the information that was looked at. And this is an important slide, and it tells us as much as anything else that the vast majority of regulations are compliant and continue to be compliant. So in 2017, 75.3% of all the regulations were assessed as being compliant. In 2018, we had a bit of a dip to 65.9, and then an increase again to 69.4 in 2019. So not a great deal of change, not a great deal of fluctuation over the 3-year period, and consistently high level of overall compliance, which is exactly what we'd want to see, and absolutely what you'd want to see as well, I'm sure. We, in terms of our 2020 data, we're working on that, and we're keen to make it available as soon as possible. We have some 2020 data in some areas, but we haven't yet done that overall analysis in order to be able to present it quite yet, but we will do as soon as we can. So moving on, so this is regional. So as many of you will know, Tusla generally, and the HSE in fact, divide the country 4 ways into Dublin North East, Dublin Mid Leinster, South and the West. We actually have we break that in half again, so we've got 8 regional areas. We've got Dublin North, Dublin South, Dublin and the Northeast, which is that stretch of the country up in the Northeast, the Northwest, the Midwest, the Southeast, the Southwest and Mid Leinster. So each of these actually represents 2 of our areas, and we will continue to break that down as we move forward to have that additional analysis of the areas. But again, what you'll see here is this is the non-compliant regulations, not a huge amount of variation across the 3-year period. Dublin North East continues to be the area with a higher level of non-compliant regulations than the other areas. Dublin Mid Leinster similar, and in fact in 2019 there was a Dublin Mid Leinster became the area with a higher level of non-compliance, higher than Dublin North East. And then the South, fairly consistent, around 26 to 31, and the West actually was very high levels of compliance in 2017, which has gone up a little bit, and it's more consistent with the rest of with other areas, with the South, which is an equivalent area now. So that's geographically, and this is looking at the regulations themselves. So as I say, both the report and the summary report go down into this in a great deal more detail. But these are the most commonly assessed regulations that were included in the analysis. So the regulations that we as an early years inspectorate look at the most, and then an analysis of how compliant or non-compliant those were. So, and again, there isn't a great deal of change across the 3-year period. So regulation 23, as I'm sure everybody here is aware, tends to be the area where there's lower levels of compliance than other areas, and that certainly was found the case across this 3-year period, up to a high of 70% in 2018. There's an awful lot in regulation 23, as I'm sure you're all aware. There's an awful lot of things that are looked at. There's a lot of stuff about infection control, safety and issues such as that in regulation 23, and it's not a surprise to us that it continues to be the regulation where there is lower levels of compliance. Other areas, staffing levels, regulation 11 for example, it's great to see a continued low level of non-compliance in relation to that across the country. Is really positive and something that we really want to see and continue to do so. Management and recruitment, regulation 9, hovering around the same, but good to see a dip there in 2019 down to 29.6 in terms of non-compliance. Again, I'd encourage you to have a look at this yourself independently, have a look at some of the detail behind these, both the inspection report and the summary report and the full report. And we will of course make this web slideshow as well as the webinar itself available on the website. So moving on, so this is by type of service. So you can see that full day care services tend to have a consistently higher level of non-compliance in other areas, and that's something that we would absolutely expect to find. It's no surprise. Full daycare children are in the services for much longer periods of time. And there are more things such as sleep and rest, and there's more food requirements in relation to full daycare, so we would expect to see that, and there isn't a huge amount of change. And similarly across sessional part-time, there isn't much change across the 3-year period. Drop-ins and childminders are so much smaller in numbers that any change can result in a significant percentage change. So that jump to 40.6 in 2019 isn't as concerning as it might look initially because of the small numbers of drop-in services across the country. Again, it's worth exploring that if you run a drop-in service, having a look at the report and having a look at that for yourself and getting a little bit more detail. So now we come on to moving away from the regulations themselves to look at a couple of other areas, including notifications of incidents. So notification of incidents, as I'm sure you're all very familiar with, comes under the regulation 31 of our 2016 regulations, whereby registered providers are required to notify us in writing within 3 working days of becoming aware of any specific incidents occurring in the service. And there's some examples of what a notifiable incident is: death of a child in the service or following transfer from the service, child or staff member diagnosed with an infectious disease, serious injury to a preschool child, irregular closure of a service, or a child missing from a service. And this has been interesting because this is one of the ones where we've been able to put 2020 data in. And before 2020, there was a steady rise, as you can see, from 2017 to 2019, from 203 in 2017 up to 403 in 2019, and then a huge jump in 2020 to up to 774. And I'm sure you don't need me to tell you what accounts for that significant increase, given that we've had a pandemic across the world and across the country. And that, to me, and in fact, that this trend generally reflects the requirements of early years providers to notify us where there are incidents, and the fact that providers are complying with the requirement to notify us where there are incidents. So the fact that it rose steadily even before 2020 is not necessarily a bad thing at all. It's indicative of compliance and indicative of services doing what they're supposed to be doing in terms of letting us know. And then the big jump this year is an indication that many services have unfortunately had to tell us about COVID outbreaks or potential COVID outbreaks in their services. So that's pretty much what we'd expect to see. We certainly will expect to see a decline again in 2021. Fingers crossed, touch wood, and etc. in terms of COVID. But I wouldn't be surprised if it stays up at around the sort of higher levels that we saw in 2019. So moving on to unsolicited information, which some of you may be aware, we've recently renamed our unsolicited information department. It's now called the Feedback and Concerns Team, which I think is a much pleasanter and more appropriate and actually more accurate term for what the team does, because it deals with both feedback and concerns, and Helen will be talking considerably about that a little bit later on. But in this period we were calling it unsolicited information, so this reflects that, and this is another one where similarly we've been able to include some 2020 data. So there was a steady increase in unsolicited information coming into us, and again, do look at the data, do look at the summary report, do look at the full report, but in my view, to some extent, this just reflects people's growing understanding of requirements around unsolicited information, and growing understanding of when information does need to be passed to us. It doesn't necessarily, this doesn't go into the details about outcomes in relation to that. It just tells us when you, as registered providers of services, told us, or when anybody, any interested parties in relation to services told us where there was something that they were potentially concerned about in relation to a service. The fact that there's such a significant drop from 597 in 2019 to 253 in 2020, the complete converse of what happened with notifications of incidents, is again accounted for by the fact that many of your services were unfortunately closed during for long periods of time during 2020. So of course we'd expect to see significantly less unsolicited information submitted to us. So that sort of moving away from the information that was in Sinead Hanifan's report, and I'm just going to capture a few statistics really in terms of our inspections across the course of the 2 years, so for your information really. So in 2019 we had 4,310 registered early years services across the country, and those are our inspection statistics. So we undertook 2,308 inspections during that year, during the course of 2019, and you can see when we did them. So you can see that in 2019 certainly we were most active in terms of undertaking inspections in May. We were least active, again, as you probably would inspect, in December. So if I move on to 2020, to the inspections that were undertaken in 2020, again, we had 4,210 services registered there, and we undertook 1,812 inspections. You won't be surprised to see that we didn't undertake any in April and May, because we wouldn't have had any services to inspect in April and May, because again, unfortunately, they were closed. When the first lockdown ended in September, around that period of time, we managed to inspect and take quite a number of inspections, and then obviously it started to trail off again slightly, but we kept those numbers relatively high in 2020. We will have considerably more data and information, obviously, in relation to 2020 in terms of what we found on those inspections as soon as it becomes available. Another stat for 2019 and 20 about applications for a new service. So there were 142 applications for a new service in 2019, and there were 107 applications for a new service in 2020. And of those, during that period of time, we approved 93 in 2019, and we approved 91 in 2020. None were rejected. We didn't refuse registration of any services in either of those 2 years. It's just that the processing and the detail and all of the required documentation hadn't been processed in time. That's why the numbers are slightly lower than the amount of the applications that we received. Closures of early year services. This is quite interesting. In 2019, 196 closures were brought to our attention, and in 2020, 197, just one more, which is probably a surprise. It certainly surprised me when I first saw this statistic. We will do some greater analysis of the types of those services, the types of services that we're closing. We do obviously have that information, and we can look at that. But overall, the amount of services that closed in 2020 was considerably lower than one might have feared, which is obviously a good news story across the sector generally. So that's pretty much my presentation. I know I've gone through that quite quickly. I will stop sharing my screen now, and I'll hand back to Mike, and then collectively we'll have a look if there's any specific questions that we might take in relation to that. So just bear with me while I stop sharing.
That's great, Grant. Thank you. Thank you very much. It was a wonderful presentation. If there's any questions coming in, we might take some of those now.
Yeah, I'm just.
Grant, have you access to those, please?
I'm just having a look. Yeah, let me see. Sometimes they come up really easily, and sometimes they don't. Hold on. Here we are. Okay. So there's a question from Alec. What happens if a child goes to a doctor as, this is in relation to notification of incidents. I might pass this to you, in fact, Mike, but what happens if a child goes to a doctor as a precaution and after observation requires no treatment? Is this a specified incident under Regulation 31? Do you want to take that, Mike?
Yeah, well, thanks, Alec, for the question. It's a great question, and every year we take a look at our processes, and we look at kind of the assessment of notified incidents. Alec, it doesn't fall under the requirement for notification. The regulation is quite specific that emergency treatment is required. Precautionary assessment doesn't meet the threshold for emergency treatment. So when we get those into us, and we do tend to get a few of those into us, Alec, across the year, we don't count them in our statistics for in our count for notifications at the end of the year. Thank you.
Okay, that's the only question that's in there at the moment that I can see. I'll keep looking, and there's more might come in, but I don't know. Mike, if you want to pass over to Denise.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Grant. Thank you, everybody. I want to introduce my colleague Denise Collins, who said earlier is the registration manager of responsibility for enforcement. And Denise is going to take you through our findings from enforcement activity and their outcomes for the same period. So over to you, Denise. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Grant. So again, to reiterate, this that I'll be doing the presentation this evening on is based on the early years regulatory enforcement process, and the outcomes, and it relates really and specifically to 2018 and 2019, and it references, as Grant said, the research that went into the annual report that was compiled by Sinead Hannafin. So the report that I'll be referencing this is the first page of it. It's about 50 pages, and it really details about the corrective and preventative actions, which you'd know as the CAPAs, the immediate action notice that have had to be issued during these 2 years, any conditions attached to the registration, and any removal from the register. There's also a short summary that's also available to reference. So there will be a number of things I'll be talking about this evening that will be in far more detail in those reports. So I will just let me know if it's moved on. Perfect. So the approach that Sinead adopted in relation to this was to carry out a quantitative and qualitative analysis of the regulatory enforcement process over a 2-year period that started January 2018 and ended in December 2019. The data that was looked at was all early years inspection reports in 2018, which was 1,557 reports, and in 2019, which was 1,389 reports. And these were reviewed for immediate action notices and any conditions attached to the service. There then was a random selection of 500 non-compliant regulations for the analysis of the corrective and preventative actions. Data linkage with the early years register to enable analysis by additional areas. We looked at the status of the service, number of personnel, etc. So some of you may be familiar with this, and some of you may have seen it online. So we have a kind of a triangulation of regulatory enforcement process. So it really starts at the very, very bottom. As you can see, it's our registration. So as you know, from the 1st of July 2016, any early year service that wishes to be registered with ourselves and be placed on the directory of early year services has to now go through a registration process. Any of the services previously was through SDF and have either completed or continued to go through the re-registration process. So any service that's registered with ourselves gets an inspection. Obviously, as you know, it would be a fit for purpose inspection, initial inspection, and then the continued inspection. So from each of the inspections, if there's any non-compliance found on the day of inspection, they have what's called corrective and preventative actions. So when any of yourselves as registered providers, you will always get the initial draft of your inspection, and if it's fully compliant, you will just have factory accuracy, so just to check to make sure that everything is factually correct in the report and there's no other issues or actions to be done. If there's any non-compliance found under each of the individual regulations, you're given an opportunity to submit your corrective and preventative actions. There's obviously 2 routes that you go down. You have 10 days and then 5 days for your actions, which are then reviewed. So as we move up the triangle, you see that it gets more and more, I suppose, into the kind of escalation process. So corrective and preventative is the first part of the escalation. While on inspection, if something is seen that is a particular and an immediate risk to children, which is usually, as you know, could be a guard vetting, somebody's on the premises without guard vetting, or it could be very high room temperatures in the sleep room, what's called an immediate action notice is issued. And that's issued from the relevant regional registration and inspection manager, the IRM, who will initially send the immediate action notice immediately during the inspection or following the inspection, depending on the communication between the EYI and the IRM. And that is looking for an immediate response from yourselves as registered providers. And in the most, these immediate action notices are dealt with and addressed immediately. If following the corrective and preventative and possible immediate action notices, the next stage in escalation that still is out with the inspection team, they will ask for a regulatory compliance meeting, and that's usually held with the registered provider and a manager on duty. That meeting is, you know, it could be a couple of hours long. Obviously, at the moment, we're all getting very used to doing it via Zoom and by these Teams meetings, so they're not in person as they were before. And really, the purpose of the regulatory compliance meeting is to go through in detail what are the remaining concerns for the inspection team based on the inspection and the following corrective and preventative actions that they received. What's still outstanding possibly, or maybe what concerns and assurances that are further needed to ensure that these non-compliances will not arise again. So as we move up then, some services following the regulatory compliance meeting, the operations team are still concerned that there's non-compliances remaining, and they get presented and referred to what we call a conditions panel. That's where we would consider to possibly propose and then attach a registration. A condition to the registration, or it could be that you have a current condition attached and it's to be amended or possibly removed. As we go on then to further escalation, we move more into the enforcement process. And if there's still remaining concerns and issues regarding services, they can be referred to what we call our NREP, which is our National Registration and Enforcement Panel, where one of the actions that can be considered is that a further meeting is held with the register provider, which is called a regulatory enforcement meeting. And I suppose this is at another level, and it's more into the area of enforcement, where we're really outlining what our issues are. And an awful lot of the time, it's around the assurances that the compliance will be maintained and considered. A lot of the time, services are correcting things in the immediate, but they may not be sustaining, they may not be maintaining it. So you may have, a history, there could be a number of inspections that's happened, and consistent and persistent non-compliances are arising. And that's what's brought to the meeting. As I said, from that panel, there's a number of different actions that be considered. Obviously, one of the most serious enforcement process that we would take is that we would move to do a proposal to remove and eventually remove a service from the registrar directory. Obviously, legal proceedings can be taken by the service to stop that removal, and it can also be taken against attachment of conditions. So while it is the very top of our triangle here, it can actually happen lower down in regards to the conditions being attached, and to a proposal to remove can be stopped as well through the legal process. But as you know, it's a very small percentage of services that actually go through this triangle. But that in a nutshell is really our process of escalation that moves into enforcement currently with early years. So to kind of go back to the corrective and preventative, as I said, this is our first stage of escalation within operations. And this is to literally, in a nutshell, to correct the non-compliances that's found on inspection and prevent them from happening in the future. So when you looked at the report, 85.8%, so nearly 86% of non-compliant regulations resulted in verified improvements in the service, and a further 3.6 of improvements would be verified at the next inspection. So what does that mean? It means following the corrective and preventative process, nearly 86% of all non-compliance regulations were resolved. So that brings it just to 14% that may have gone up the triangle that I spoke about. And as I said, a further 3.6 were reviewed and verified at the next inspection, because as you know, a lot of actions, you nearly need to see them in person, particularly around regulation 19 or 23, rather than sending it in paperwork. So 11% of regulations remain non-compliant, as I said, at the end of the CAPA process, suggesting that insufficient improvements were made at that time. Improvements to the service as a result of this process were identified in respect of the governance of the service, the health, welfare and development of the child, safety and premises of facilities. When we move on to our next stage of escalation, which is our immediate action notices, 197 immediate action notices in respect of regulations were in 2018 reports, and 110 in 2019. So there was a significant drop there in 2019. So when you look at the most likely to be identified in reports of inspections in, so again, following the trend of grants analysis of the non-compliant regulations, in full daycare services, 73.6% of all notices issued in 2018 were from a full daycare service. That dropped then to 56.4% in 2019. And just a quick note, 35% of all services registered with us account for full daycare, and that was from 2018. If you look at a particular region, which is DML, as Grant said, the regions are done by 4, even though early years is obviously into 8 regions. And this is basically Dublin, Mid-Leinster. So it's really the kind of South Dublin area along with the Mid-Leinster region. 31% in 2018 and 32.7% in 2019 received an immediate action notice. So if you look, that this area accounted for 28% of the services registered in 2018. So there is a high percentage of services registered in this area, but when you look from that, 31 in 2018 and rose slightly to 32.7 in 2019. I think this is an interesting view. Services with 0 to 5 employees accounted for about half of all immediate action notice issued. So to say, you know, services that are currently on the directory in 2018, 66.4% accounted for this 0 to 5 employees. So more than half of all services registered with us fall in this category, which we think would account for some of the reason why half of the immediate action notice was issued here. When you look at private services in Pacific versus the community services, there was 78.6% in 2018 and rose slightly to 82.5% in 2019. Again, it accounts for 76% of all registered services in 2018, which would account for the higher percentages because there's obviously more services that fall under that category registered with ourselves. Okay. So a few notes that came up from the report, which in fairness, a lot of the times will be common sense for people. Service where immediate action notice were issued were more likely to be non-compliant. You know, it was rare an immediate action notice was issued when there was just one specific issue recorded on the inspection. There was usually a number of non-compliances recorded. The mean average number of non-compliant regulations in these reports was 5.14 compared to about 1.8 found in the overall analysis of reports. So that makes it very clear that over 5 of the regulations were non-compliant in these reports versus the reports that didn't have an immediate action notice was only 1.8. 79% of immediate action notice relate to Regulation 9, which, as you know, is management and recruitment, and Regulation 23, safeguarding health, safety and welfare of the child. And that makes sense because what you're looking at with immediate action notice is the immediate risk that possibly is presented to children. So when you look at it, 55.4, they would mainly relate to Garda vetting. As you know, 9.2c, if you have someone on your premises that doesn't have appropriate and relevant Garda vetting, you know, that is automatically an issue of an immediate action notice and they must leave the premises until they have an appropriate vetting in place. It's interesting to see under Regulation 23 that of the immediate action notice issued, 33% related to sleep. So, you know, there's a lot of specific things in relation to sleep regarding temperatures and time and checks that obviously pose an immediate risk to children. So it would make sense that if there's concerns found on inspection in this area, then immediate action notice would be issued to be addressed immediately because it may have an immediate risk to children and future children in the service over the next couple of days while they address it. Conditions are attached to the service. So if we look at kind of number crunching here, conditions that were attached to 2018 was 206 services, which at the time was 13.2% of all registered services. And in 2019, there was 140 services, which equaled 10%. Reports of services with conditions attached had, on average, a higher number of non-compliant regulations. So more in line with the immediate action notices, it looks like 4.29 in 2018 and 19. So over 4 regulations were non-compliant on average in the reports where conditions were considered, which when it compared to reports of services where a condition was not attached. And when the analysis was done, the regulations most likely to be identified are Regulation 9, which was 87 in 2018 and 49 in 2019, and Regulation 23, which was 64 in 2018 and 34 in 2019. And like that, the trend is there. You know, you're looking at the immediate action notice falls very neatly into the conditions. Now, there is a lot more kind of information on the reports, particularly on page 10. It really does outline quite a number of regulations, like Regulation 8, which is operating outside of registration status, maybe the premises, which is 29, which will show you, you know, how they were addressed. They may have been non-compliant and been considered at the time, but in the end process, the conditions were less attached to other regulations and they were more attached to 9 and 23, which means they weren't satisfactorily addressed at the end of the inspection process, and a condition was proposed and then attached to their registration. Okay, we move then on to the next stage, which again is following up our escalation into the enforcement. So the removals from the early years register, and we flagged here from 2018 to 2020. So in 2018, there was 2 services removed from the register. It increased slightly to 4 in 2019 and dropped to 3 in 2020. And again, with TRED, you know, the 3 were more in the earlier part of the year than the latter part of the year in regards to, you know, with COVID services closures, some services making the decision to close themselves. So when you look at the trend, it was certainly the start of the year, and had COVID not happened, it may have increased or it may not have. You know, from the report, you'll be able to read as well that there was 1 prosecution taken in 2019, and that was regarding an unregistered service. So that's the end of my presentation. I am going to stop sharing now, and if anybody has any questions or anything, Grant, you might let me know on the chat, because my chat is a little bit delayed. It doesn't come up automatically.
Yeah, I do, Denise. There's one here about, oh, I'm getting a bit of feedback on myself. That seems okay. It's a question from Paula. Are conditions only attached after a regulatory compliance meeting? I don't know who wants to take that, Denise, or Mike, or myself.
I can take that, Grant. So
okay.
There is a process that's followed. More times the regulatory compliance meeting is held absolutely before condition is considered, but depending on the risk that it's posed, it may move and escalate and pass the regulatory compliance meeting. But in essence, with the condition, that is really one of the last stages that we apply. So we need to have a rationale. We need to ensure that we're very clear why a condition is being applied to registration, and we need to be assured that the service is fully clear the expectation of what we were looking to address the issues before it's applied. As I said, 9 times out of 10 a regulatory compliance meeting is held, and it's one of the criteria for referral to the conditions panel that a regulatory compliance meeting was had. But if there was a very specific risk applied to children, we may consider a condition without the regulatory compliance meeting being held.
Okay, thanks, Denise. There's a couple more. Mike, are you okay if I just keep going on with the questions?
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
There's a couple more here. So there's one. Yeah, you can see them. Can you, Mike?
I can't, but if you want to. Okay,
yeah. Sorry. So there's one from a Rachel, and it's about time frame for response from Tusla. So basically, Rachel's saying that there's a 10-day work period for the service to respond to a CAPA, whereas Tusla may take a considerably longer period of time to respond back again. That's the sort of summary of the question.
Yeah, so we understand. So the time frame, myself and Mike would work in the registration department, so we would get the final end of the inspection reports. Our understanding is that there is a time frame that's dealt with by the operations team, and that's certainly been reviewed and audited on a regular basis. And I know they're trying to reduce the times from one to another, but it does take a couple of weeks to, particularly if there was, it really depends on the level of non-compliance found on inspection, the amount of CAPAs, because some people can submit a page or 2, some others then are huge and they give an awful lot of evidence. So it really depends on the volume of information and the level of non-compliance that needs to be reviewed and considered. And they may have to, the EYI may have to check with their IRM and consider, does it meet the criteria? Are they assured that it's been now addressed? Or does it maybe be considered to the next level? And that's all going on behind the scenes that obviously the register provider wouldn't be aware of. And those discussions could take time. And the decision then could be, yes, they've accepted the CAPA. They're satisfied, it's getting, continued registration, there's no conditions being applied, but it may have gone over and back. It may have come to me or Mike for consideration as well, so absolutely there is time in the background, and I certainly know operations have considered that time, and they really are trying to improve the time frames from, I suppose, draft to finalisation, and it really depends on the non-compliance and depends on the paperwork. That may take longer depending on the service as well, and obviously the size of the service and the level of concern and risk that posed on the day of inspection. I
just might come in on that one as well, Grant. I mean, I think it's a very fair question to ask about in terms of, you know, time responses. I suppose the other factor that can delay time responses is that our inspection teams are very much responding to risk all of the time. Unsolicited information come in, has to be assessed, and sometimes, you know, that will take priority over kind of existing work, which can delay some responses kind of going back. But as my colleague Denise said, it is an area that we're constantly looking at, and our colleagues in the inspection side of the house are constantly looking at their timeframes and response times, and have made considerable kind of, you know, changes to their kind of operational processes to shorten the response times as best as possible. Thanks, Grant.
Thank you. Thank you. There's another question from Katrina about, can you share some stats about how often reports are accessed online? I'm assuming this is referring to the inspection reports that we published and how often they're accessed. We don't currently have statistics in relation to that, but it's something that we're certainly interested in looking at, and will continue to do so. We know that there's a significant increase in the amount of people who are looking at published inspection reports, which we're very pleased about, because we absolutely want there to be, and Helen will talk a little bit about some of the work that we've done on the website in relation to that, and it's something that we'll certainly look at in the future in relation to making sure that to doing some analysis of that and having some understanding of how often they are being looked at. There's just one more question. I'm conscious of the time. There's one more question that I think we might have seen before on a couple of the other sessions. It's from Martina in relation, and it's not actually in relation to what we're talking about this evening, but it is on, we have discussed briefly on previous webinars. It's about pregnant members of staff being able to work in services. Martina, we're not going to be able to provide with a detailed response this evening, but that is a question that we have had before, and is something that we are considering. Whether or not we'll be able to give it a definitive answer when HSE and Public Health haven't been able to, I'm not sure, but we have made note of it, as we make note of all your questions, and we will put together as much information as we can in response to all the questions that we get in today, as we have done for all the sessions.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, Grant, thank you. We might move on. Say, conscious of time, we're already up to 5 to 8, and thank you, Denise. And I'm going to now introduce you to Helen Ruine. Helen has been our project lead in relation to the parental consultation project.
Thank you very much, Mike. Good evening, everybody. Can you all hear me? I'd like to share with you this evening a consultation we undertook with parents during 2019, and I'd also like to share then with you the recommendations arising from that consultation and how we have implemented those recommendations. So this is a consultation report. It's called Tusla Early Years Inspectorate Parents Consultation. The consultation was undertaken in April and March and April 2019. So why would we consult with parents? Well, we know now from the research that the involvement of parents in their child's care and education is hugely considered to be crucial to their development and well-being. And many studies have shown that children's outcomes are improved in situations where parents are involved. And we know from the first 5, the whole of government strategy for babies, young children and their families, that parental involvement is explicitly acknowledged within it. And we know that where there are opportunities for active participation by parents in their child's development, in their curriculum, in their early years, it's identified as one aspect of the essential components of providing a good quality early year service. Of course, Tusla is also a key, also acknowledges this key element of child's development. And indeed, we have this documented in our parent strategy. And you're also probably aware the Department of Children and Youth Affairs, now called the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth, are also developing their parent strategy, which will be published later on this year. And of course, parents and their involvement in their child's learning and development is strongly underpinned by lots of the documents and frameworks, including the Ashton Shield Practice Guide and our own quality and regulatory framework. So from our point of view, it is very important that parents have a say in, you know, what they would like to know and for us to do with regard to early year services. What was our aim in meeting with parents? Well, we wanted to ask them. We wanted to understand from parents what was their awareness and knowledge about Tusla inspections. And I suppose we wanted to ask them as well, what were their views about, what do they think it is important that Tusla would be inspecting? And then we wanted to ask parents, what would their views be of their involvement in the inspection process, or would they like to be involved in the inspection process? And if they would, how could we, Tusla, Early Years Inspectorate, support that involvement? So this consultation, as I said, it took place in March and April in 2019. We took very much a qualitative approach. It was based on focus group interviews. We wrote to all early registered service providers by letter, by email, and we invited any service who would like to assist us in this consultation process. So 66 registered services responded and said they would like to be involved. And from those 66 services, we took a stratified random sample, which took account, of course, of the geographic region, the service size and the type, so that we were able to visit those services from full daycare, from sessional, that we went to, we went up to Roscommon, we went to Waterford, we went to Clare, we went to Dublin. So we went to a lot of different areas across the country, and we had a total of 9 focus groups were convened, including childminders, and we also had one through the medium of Irish and the Gaeltacht. We met with a total of 70 parents, 60 of them were mums and 10 were dads. And what did parents tell us? Well, parents in the first instance, all of the parents we met, they were overwhelmingly positive about their child's service. Like, parents said a wide variety of comments, and they're all detailed in the consultation report. But for example, they said things like, I could not praise my service highly enough. If I had any more children, they would all come here. So parents were very positive about the service that their child attended. We wanted to know then, what did parents know about Tusla, and how aware were they of the Tusla Early Years Inspectorate? So amazingly, parents were generally unaware that Tusla inspected services. They had very little awareness or knowledge. Their perception of Tusla was one of child protection and child protection reporting. They had no or very limited knowledge about the availability of inspection reports. And those parents that did have some knowledge were parents who were for some way connected with Tusla themselves, or they were primary school teachers, or they had some awareness that services might be checked or inspected. And parents, were not aware of the role of Tusla in dealing with concerns about children, or indeed about services having to have a complaints policy and procedure. Like, one parent said, it's not something that ever crossed my mind. So we then asked parents, well, look, we're Tusla, we're the Early Years Inspectorate. What for you as a parent do you think is important for us to inspect? So the very first thing that parents told us was that safety was paramount for them. They said their child's safety was the most important issue and should be examined on inspection. And they highlighted particular areas, I suppose, of specific importance, such as first aid, the ongoing supervision of children, the security of the building, fire safety, and the environment, that the environment itself was safe and free from hazards. Like, one parent would have said, well, you're leaving your kids in here in the morning, you would want to hope that they're safe, that when you come back in the evening, you should have the whole child in one piece. They also told us that their child's health and development was really important to them. They wanted their child to be happy in the service. They wanted their child to be well cared for and their needs to be met. Parents said that good, positive relationships and positive interactions between staff and children and between the children themselves were really important to them, and they wanted Tusla to be looking at these. Also of importance was the educational activities were there and implemented to support their child's development. One parent commented, "I like this place. Staff are very comfortable. They interact with the kids." And that was only one of the many positive comments that parents shared with us. Parents also identified that the management of the service and the governance of the service was really important to them. It was really important for parents that staff were qualified and vetted. They also cited that a low turnover of staff as being important to them and something that they considered important, because they said if there was a high turnover of staff, it caused concern for them about the care of their child and the relationships of staff with their children. They identified their child having a key worker and they having a named person that they were able to link with as being very important. And they said that it was very important that the service kept them informed about things that were going on in the service, like change of staff and about their child. And it was really important, parents said, that they could discuss their concerns with the staff. Parents had some commentary about the environment, but it wasn't the most important element. They did identify, there should be enough space for their children to move around freely and to play. There should be a nice rest area, a safe rest area. The service should be clean and there should be access to the outdoor play areas on a daily basis, and the toileting facilities were important for them. One parent said you'd want it maintained, you'd want it bright and cheerful and stuff for them. You're not going to send them into somewhere that's old and mouldy or that hasn't been looked at in years. So while parents did identify the environment and these issues in particular of importance to them, the commentary and the narrative and the discussion around the environment was less than the other areas. So I suppose what parents really said with regard to Tusla and the inspectorate, they really wanted their children to be happy and safe in services, and they wanted Tusla to be inspecting those areas. When we asked them then what would they consider would be unacceptable practices, they were very clear and they said that it would be totally unacceptable to them if their child was not happy in the service, if the safety was poor, if there was poor nutrition, if their child was coming home hungry, or if their child wasn't getting enough to eat in the service, and they talked about the different types of food. It was really important to them that personnel in the service would know the parent's name, and they saw this as a real red flag if parents weren't familiar with them as a parent. Parents not allowed free access to the service, they saw that as a red flag. Now, of course, this was pre-COVID when we undertook this consultation, so that is a different context now. And of course, what's totally unacceptable would be if somebody was hurting their child. We then went on and we asked them, well, do you think parents should be involved in the inspection process? Just move that one on there, Grant, please. Okay. And parents had very mixed views about being involved in the early years inspection process. Like, they said things like, look, it is the norm in primary schools, but they felt that they may not be objective enough as parents and knowledgeable enough about the regulatory requirements to make, the informed, to make an informed decision or have the required information about the service. They saw potential for problems between parent and provider if they, as the parent, were giving negative feedback as part of an inspection process. And they also felt that where a parent has difficulty with the service, it is really the responsibility of the parent to first address this problem with the service. However, they did say it would be very important for parents to be involved if they were not happy with the service. So we having spoken with parents, we took all of that information and a number of recommendations were developed from the consultations. And these key elements are, okay, parents should know when inspection is taking place in their service, because parents did not know that inspections were taking place. They didn't know the results of the inspection of their service, and they did not know there was where to access inspection reports, and they were not aware that the services are required to have a complaints process. So providers, it is recommended that providers should share the services inspection report with parents. Parents should have a choice in sharing their views on the service with the inspectors if they wish. And consideration should be given to recognising excellent services and the involvement of parents in the selection of these excellent services. So all of these recommendations came from parents' suggestions following on the information they gave with us. So what did we do about this? So having looked at all of the information parents gave us and having looked at what they said that they would like Tusla to do, we have developed firstly 3 information leaflets to explain to parents who we are and what we do, who the early years inspectors are and what do we do. We have developed a leaflet of choosing an early years service and also what to expect from an early years service. So this is from the regulatory point of view and from Tusla's point of view. So these 3 leaflets are available on our webpage. We had hoped to have them printed and available, but Public Health advised against us because of COVID. And look, when we are out the other side of COVID, we will be able to make these available in print format and they will be available for parents. They're also in plain English, so they're very easy to read. So what do the leaflets contain? Well, who we are and what we do tells us tells parents who the Tusla early years inspectors are, their role, the reason for inspection, and what Tusla registered services are required to do. The leaflet on choosing an early years service looks at the different types of early years service and where to get a copy of an inspection report. Parents told us, particularly first-time parents told us, that the 2 most common ways that they identified where they would put their child was by asking word of mouth and by Facebook or social media through their friends. And the 3rd leaflet is what a parent can expect from an early years service and who to contact with a concern about an early years service. And we have made it very clear within that the first port of call, always with a concern, is to the service provider or the manager of the service. So we have also developed, so parents said to us, look, it would be really, really useful if when I go to the service, if I knew when the inspection was taking place. So parents told us that when they were in services, sometimes they just knew that an inspection was going on because they saw the Tusla inspector there and with her name badge around her neck. Or on some occasions, the service provider would have told parents that they had an inspection, and some service providers make the inspection reports available. So this is what parents told us. So parents asked us, would we do a poster to display in the service that would say that an early years inspection is taking place here today by Tusla, and also that and where the inspection report can be accessed. So we have developed a poster that the early years inspector post-COVID, when we're out the other side of COVID, will display in the service when the inspector is on inspection, and it just simply says that the early years inspectorate is carrying out an inspection here today, and it will have the date, and it says the inspection report will be available in due course from the service provider and online. And it also then gives information if you would like to give feedback on the service, you can do so by completing a feedback form on our website. One other thing the parents told us was that when they go to the publication site for the inspection report, those that it wasn't always clear to them the date of the last inspection. So on that basis, we have added to all of our services the date of the last inspection once the inspection has been completed, because as you know, once an inspection is completed, it can be a period of time before the inspection report is published on the website. So where an inspection has taken place and the report is not yet published, the date of the last inspection is added to the report publication webpage, and the information is, there's a little note placed on the publication page advising of that. So I said there that on the poster that there was an opportunity for parents to give feedback through a parent feedback form. So parents were very strong of the opinion that they would very much like to be able to give feedback, to give positive feedback on their service, and that there wasn't any facility there at the moment to inform Tusla. While there is a mechanism for making a complaint, there isn't a mechanism for giving positive feedback. So we have developed, based on what the parents told us was important for Tusla Early Years Inspector to look on inspection, we based the feedback form on that information. So what does the feedback form look like? There are 9 statements on the parent feedback form, and the statements are: I am happy with this service, my child is happy in this service, there is a good atmosphere, issues arising in the service are dealt with appropriately, I am satisfied with the safety of the service, I am satisfied with the relationships in the service, I am satisfied with the play and learning opportunities provided for my child in this service, I am satisfied with the governance of the service, and I am satisfied with the premise of the facilities. So there are 9 statements, and parents have the opportunity to rate each of those statements with that they strongly agree to strongly disagree. So they strongly agree, they're undecided, they disagree, or they strongly disagree. And we will share all of that feedback with the registered provider when we receive it. If any concern is identified, an inspection may be prioritised. Like, we don't know how much information parents will give. We have made it very clear on our website that the parent feedback form is not a complaints mechanism. It's not a mechanism for raising concerns, that where a parent has any concern, that they should in the first instance go to the registered provider and seek the complaints policy and speak to the provider. And however, life being what it is, there may be occasions where information is identified within the feedback form that gives rise for concern to Tusla. And if that is the case, it will be followed up, and it may result in an inspection being prioritised for the service, or it may result in us seeking more information from the early years provider. Where a concern is identified, it will be processed through what is now called the Feedback and Concerns Office. So it will be managed in that way. The leaflet, the poster, the parent feedback form, and the report are available in English and in Irish. We have also updated our web page with regard to parents and guardians information. So our web page has been redesigned. So the web page now gives lots of information in a very easily accessible format. So at a glance, a parent or a guardian can look at all of the areas, there, who we are, what we do, the register, why we inspect, inspection reports, all the information that parents told us when we met with them was important for them to have in a one-stop shop. So that brings me to the end of my presentation, and thank you very much. I hope it was informative. The Parents Consultation Report is available on our website. It also has a summary which is available, and you are very welcome to read it. There is lots of really good information in there about very positive feedback from parents about their service. Thank you very much.
Great, Helen. Thank you. Thanks so much for you piled so much in a very small period of time, given the amount of work that has gone into that. So thank you for your presentation, Helen.
I have access here to some of the questions. So I'll just, there's one question here, and it comes from Coit McCabe. And Coit says, so parents should know when this inspection is taking place, but we shouldn't. So just maybe to clarify, Coit, parents will know there is an inspection taking place on the day of the inspection. So the poster will be put up, so you will know before the parent, because we will be in the service inspecting your service, and we will put the poster up. So any parents coming to the service on that day will be able to see the poster, and they will see that the inspection is taking place on that day. On that day. So I hope that clarifies that. Abigail has a statement in here. She said, "Is it the norm in a primary school?" Yes, the Department of Education does, on some occasions, as part of their inspection, invite parents to give written feedback on a questionnaire, and that is used to inform their inspection. So remember now, this is what parents told us on our consultation. So they had experience of being invited to give feedback as part of the Department of Education inspection. Tusla inspections are based on regulations, that's correct. Is all the feedback going to be added to the regulations? The feedback, Coish, is based on Abigail, is based on what parents informed us was important to them, and they're there in those 9 statements. So yes, they do correlate very much to the regulations, but you know, the register provider will get this information. Does that make sense? That the register provider, any feedback we get, that will be shared with the register provider. It's not going to be in the public domain. We'll be giving it back to the register provider, but it won't be published anywhere at this point in time anyhow. So any information we get will be shared with the register provider.
I might just come in on that, Helen, if I can, please. There is an intention then at the end of every year to publish a report of feedback from parents on services that we receive, but it would be a composite report.
Yeah, there are various questions coming in, and as we've said, and we will make sure that we note all these questions and respond to them. But I just think as a general comment, that we see this as a really positive step. It's really important for us to engage with parents and give them the opportunity to talk to us about what's happening to their children, but given how important the care of their children is, and B, for the first time, it allows us to hear directly from them about the positive things that are happening in their services. And regulators all around the world do similar things to this in early years services. It's very common and a normal practice in regulation to seek the views of parents in this instance, or effectively your users. And the research and the investigations that we've done lead us to think that the vast majority of parents who have an opportunity to feedback like this will provide positive feedback, and we really look forward to receiving it. We think it's a really positive move for the sector generally. The poster, there's a few comments about the poster. The poster simply provides parents with an opportunity to know that an inspection has taken place. It's not a compulsory. If providers absolutely don't want a poster to be put up, then that isn't something that inspectors are going to insist on. But the purpose of it is just to allow parents to know an inspection is happening, and that we would be very interested to hear from them. Mike, I'm just conscious there's a few questions came in relation to the previous piece. Well, in fact, it's more in relation to registration, in relation to registration certificates.
Yeah.
And when services are likely to receive them. I feel like we should capture that if possible.
Yeah, I mean, it's come up, hasn't it, a few times, in the previous kind of webinars, and yeah, it's our intention to kind of this quarter now to start issuing out those certificates. We've had some delay in that in relation to the re-registration process and our ability to kind of finalize the details kind of on each certificate, but we're well advanced in relation to preparations for issuing, and they'll start being issued kind of in phases now from this quarter onwards.
Great, thank you. Helen, another one you might want to come back on, is the parental feedback anonymous?
Yes, there is a facility within the feedback form for parents to give their name and phone number if they wish. We will, of course, have their email address from whence the information came, but parents do not have to give their name, but they can if they wish.
So following on from that, how will we know that forms from parents are actually parents and not somebody random?
There is a possibility, yes, that we could, and that's one of the reasons we're just sharing it with the provider. It's not going to be published. It's not going to be made public. There is a possibility, yes, that we may get feedback forms in that are not from a parent. They may be from somebody else. So we're very cognizant and aware of that.
Lovely, thank you very much. And as Mike has said, it's our intention to produce a summary report in relation to parental feedback that at the end of the year that's at a high level to give us some understanding of what parents are saying. And as we've said, our experiences elsewhere are that overwhelmingly when parents have an opportunity to feedback like this, their feedback is positive. And I think that it's a really good opportunity for us to hear directly from parents in that regard. I think there's a few questions about notified inspections and unnotified inspections and the fact that ours are unannounced and they will continue to be so, which is why, Helen, you might want to pick up on this, why the feedback that we receive won't link into an individual, a specific inspection.
Okay, parents will be able to give, parents very much wanted an inspection, an opportunity to be able to give positive feedback about their service to Tusla as an inspectorate. They felt that there was no mechanism there for that to be captured. We have looked at what other countries have done, and we have looked at the UK, we have looked at Northern Ireland, and we have, very much, correlated what we are doing with what they're doing, and we have spoken to Ofsted as well about this. And I suppose we will be looking at the type of information that comes in. We haven't received any feedback forms yet. The feedback form is available on our website. A parent can fill it up at any time. It doesn't have to be after the inspection. And we will be looking very closely at all of the information that comes in.
I think we kind of bring to an end. Firstly, kind of thank you all again kind of for attending, and any question we didn't get to, it will be included in the the Q&A document. I want to just thank my colleagues, Helen, Grant, Denise, for the presentations this evening, and particularly my colleague Grant, who's put this series of webinars together and so ably kind of chaired and presented them. And so well done, and thank you, Grant. This is the first time we've done kind of webinars. I think we're very pleased with our first go at them, and I'm hoping we'll continue doing more kind of going forward. I want to wish you all a very happy Easter and a happy holiday period, and we hope you all sort of enjoy the benefits of the extended mobility that our government have announced this evening, and stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you and good night.
Thank you very much. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you again.
Thank you.